Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. Actually going to do some work for a change instead of talking about it. These are the two mounts that were pulled out in the Sunday chat, which was on Monday and it's now Tuesday. You following all this? But component parts for this morning's exercise, mandatory, probably needed. Yes, they will be. Wire cutters, that is. This is rubbing alcohol, which is in there with my two cutting utensils into soak. The main reason for that is I have two separate plants and I have a suspicion. Watch on to find out whether my suspicions are true. We'll also be doing some tidying up on these plants. I wonder how much will be left after I've tidied. Because the tidying is going to involve some cutting. And then afterwards, what are we going to do with them? Well, they're going in a pot. And the potting bit will be in like a part 2. Not a separate video, but later, because the pots are all down in the shed and it's raining. And I'm not getting wet. They can wait. So let's get the initial phase done. Let's have some of this first. Oh, it's hot. I just made it, would be. Right, so we need wire off. This wire was put on after it was mounted because all it's doing is holding that back bulb in place. It's not holding the plant on the mount. What's doing that is the fishing line. So we'll have that off. I'm going to move this plant out of the way at the moment because I don't want the two getting near each other once I start hacking. See, now that's just lifted straight off the mount. There are no roots attached whatsoever. Now, I don't know when I mounted this, but my memory says it was quite a while ago. Now I'm watching the fishing line because that has to go in the bin so the cats can't get at it. Alright, so there's nothing wrong on the mount, that's not rotting or anything, so the mount's okay, so that can be reused and will be. Just put it out of the way for now. I've got acres of space down there after the big clean-up. The moss is alive. Yeah. Underneath this live moss appears to be some zombie moss, and that could have been part of the problem. But now I'm starting to tease the moss out. Underneath the moss are some reasonable roots. So this is not a rootless plant, as I was expecting it to be. So all that's gone wrong really with this plant is the latest set of roots have failed. The old set of roots is actually okay. I'm not going to go too mad picking this off. I'm going to revert to washing this off under this tap. He says throwing it around, because this isn't too bad at all. There is some very old moss amongst this. It's almost as though last time when I mounted this I didn't bother taking all the old moss out on the grounds it was going to go in moss on the mount. That would have probably been the logic. And when it's live moss that's fine, but not when it's zombie moss because it can still go off. But most of this is just falling off okay. It's not hanging on in any shape or form. See, that's zombie moss. So we obviously didn't clear it all out last time round, and it's been on the mount some time I believe, in which case that zombie moss is quite old. So even though I think I've got most of it, if I haven't got all of it, I do mean all of it this time too, then I will run it under the tap. But I think by just tugging at each piece I'm going to get it all. I believe I have. So we'll call that a day. Then we're going to clean up, and by clean up I mean remove sheaths. And the main reason for doing that is to check for bugs, if I've got any, deal with them and get rid of their hidey places for the future. Nowhere to hide, which is good. These old bulbs are very shriveled and desiccated, so this plant hasn't been hydrating properly for one reason or another. and the main reason I think we're going to find any minute now. Right, so that's enough tidying. There's a sign of a possible new growth there, but new growth should logically come from here. So the last new growth failed, the roots failed, the growth didn't fail, but there's an eye there that hasn't pushed. Right, so having tidied up, now let's see what's what. So that was where the rhizome was last cut. I'm now going to cut the oldest bulb off. There is a very, very thin pink ring around the edge and a little bit of rot. So I'm going to go one more. So neither of these plants are precious. And we still have our very, very pale pink thin ring. So I'm not sure whether this is currently infected or not. But as I'm effectively starting the plant again, if I take another bulb off, I will end up with no roots. So I'm going to treat this with the fungicide and leave it at this size, and we'll see if it progresses. Because there is no fungus on these. These are nice bright green leaves. So there would be no reason to give that a treatment with the fungicide. There may have been in the past, the last time that rhizome was cut, in which case we may have a resurgence of the dreaded fusarium, which can happen. So even though you've killed it off effectively, there's still spores in there, and it's still possible that it could become reinfected, or the infection could, resurge. Which would happen in a time of weakness. That's when they're most vulnerable. So where's my scissors gone? So I just want to take the ends of these roots off. So that's not a bad little root system. It's not a bad sized little plant. And if I can get this eye to push, it will produce new roots. And it will now be treated for fusarium by giving it a good spray and a root soak in a systemic fungicide. And then in the appropriate intervals time, I mustn't forget to give it its second treatment, because that's what often causes the problem. You forget the backup dose. Right, so that's one plant ready to pot. And I wouldn't say that that is badly infected. It's just a tiny little pink tinge, and it's a very, very thin ring. So this ought to be recoverable without any doubt. Right, so that's that. Let's get all that out of the way. And then we'll have a look at the second one. And I suspect we'll be dealing with exactly the same problem. Miss some. There we go. Now this time there's a little bit of attachment, not a lot. Again, the mount is sound. There's nothing wrong with the mount. So that will get used again once it's been cleaned up. See now the process, this is a rotten pseudo bulb. It's soft but not soggy. So that's got to come off, but there will be no way of checking if we... That didn't even need cutting off, did it? That was good. That means I could have taken that off ages ago. Right, so we're in the same position here. We've got to... let me just get these out, because it's the drying off process, the rapid evaporation, that really does the business on the alcohol soaked utensils. So I'm just getting all the sheaths off, even though those bulbs may well be cut off in a minute. One of them at least is going to get cut off. Now this bulb here has got black at the base. Still no bugs, I'm surprised. No scale or mealybugs or anything, they're bug free. That's good. Right. So this latest new growth has not formed a proper bulb. Yeah, it's grown, but it hasn't formed a proper bulb. It may still do that. I don't know. But we shall see. Right, again we got, this is zombie moss on here. So either this was put on with zombie moss and it's gone green, which I think is the case in this one. The other one had live moss on it, this hasn't. This has got zombie moss that's gone green, and it does that sometimes. Gives you the impression it's come back to life, which is why we sort of invented that name, the zombie moss. Yes, that was me did that. And it caught on. Lots of people use that. Which is good, because then the impression that gives me is that there's a lot of people watching the channel. But, you know, that's not necessarily so. I mean, it could be that somebody who does watch the channel adopted that, and then people have adopted it because they watch that channel. You know, so these little catchphrases and things like that get passed around from one to the other. It's often difficult to find out who started them in the first place. Doesn't really matter, does it? Right, I think that will do. Still a couple of quite big bits in here that I want out. Life is made quite easy at the moment because this is relatively dry. The mounts were sprayed yesterday, they weren't watered properly, and I want them to dry off a bit at the moment. Temperatures have dropped right down. Right, so now what we've got is we've got to deal with roots that are not growing and what are effectively old roots that have got some lovely new growth starting. So given some hydration around those root tips, they will grow on. But there's lots of parts on here that, although the roots are white, they're papery. So we will remove some. Not necessarily removing that many this time. There are some sort of dry papery ones here. Which we'll take off. No point trying to get those to grow because they won't. Alright, so that will do. The rest may well branch near the base. Like that. That's real papery, that little section there, so take the whole section off. There we go. That's not so bad now. Right, that will do. Now, as I said before, this looks like this has lost a lead, because here's your original rhizome and it's gone up and split. This bit, this bulb here, is the bulb at which point we push two new growths out. But this one has failed to progress. So that one's coming off, along with a lot of roots, no doubt. And I'm going to go to the next one. So I'm going to go to there. It means quite a few of the roots are going to come off, but not these nice ones with the new shoots. That's the one I want. And again, I wouldn't call that a bad infection. I would call that residual of a possible old infection. Because if you go back to the other cut there, that's quite bright pink. And that one's just got that very, very thin ring. Which obviously means so is this one. There. can't take much more of that rhizome off without losing my roots with the branches, and if I lose those I haven't got any good roots. So that's as far as I'm going to go. That's as far as I'm going to go. So the fact that both of them are in the same state, I don't need to worry about cross-contamination now. But there's no sign of a new eye on this yet. That's probably it there, but it's not getting pushed. So again, that will have the same treatment. That will get a thorough fungicide, systemic fungicide treatment, and sorry, I just missed a what do you call it, flower spike down in there. That's where the bugs like to get, so we'll dig down in and get that out. Right down at the base. Really good. Right, so that's as much cleaning up as they're going to get. They'll get sprayed with the fungicide and left to soak, let it soak in, including the roots. I haven't got a fungicide concentrate on the go at the moment, so I can't mix up like a glass full and actually put them in to soak. It's in a spray bottle, and I doubt if the top will come off the spray bottle. They very rarely do. They're made to not be interfered with, basically. The coffee's not, that's made to be interfered with. Bit of moss. Never mind. I'm sure people have got worse in their mouth. Right, so just going to get these back in. Give them another go. That's for the next time, not for this time. There won't be any more cutting today. And I'll just have a bit to do my fingers. That's me done now. Right, this is all infected stuff, potentially. So we will get the... Now you're all going to hate me for this, but this is for the bin in the kitchen, which is the landfill stuff. Make sure I've got it all. Yes, we have. Oops, drop some. Make sure we've got all of that so that the cats don't get hold of it and chew it. And then all what's left will just get thrown out in the garden. I have a hedge with shrubs and things, and behind that is a gap. It's actually a gap where, like, you could walk along there if you wanted to. At the moment you get absolutely soaking wet, but there is a little gap along the back there, and that's where I throw all this sort of stuff. So I will do that in a minute. And that is that session over. The next session will be getting those in the pots. Let me just have a look and see if the top will come off this fungicide, so that I could actually give them a root soak. No, they don't come off. They're fixed. They move, but they don't come off. It's an adaptation to stop people getting at that in quantity. All you can get is the spray coming out the end. I mean, I could stand there with a glass for the next hour spraying until I got a quantity, but then I wouldn't be able to get it back in there, would I? So we'll just use it as a spray, and we'll make do with that. And what I'll do is I'll go back after 5 minutes or so and respray the roots to give them plenty of opportunity to soak some in, so to get some coming in from the roots. But these are Oncidium types. They've got very thin leaves. They're not going to block the spray. The spray will be absorbed into the plant, so it will be okay. Right, and I'll be back with some pots and some potting material when I can go and get them without getting soaking wet. I'll be back. Okay, well that was annoying. I got down in the shed and there was no clean pots the right size, or somewhere near the right size. So got one slightly larger than the other because one's got longer roots than the other, and one's quite a short stubby plant. So what I'm going to use is this. When I asked Sarah for some bark at Malvern, she'd run out and all she had left was this Orchid Focus stuff. And I said, is that any good? And she said, quite honestly, it seems better than the stuff we buy in bulk. So I'm quite happy to use this. Its only problem is it's really dirty. So rather than work with wet media, which I don't like to do, I will pot dry, which is how I like to work, and then I'll give the plants a good flush through to wash out the dirt. I'm going to put some of these grow stones in. I don't know whether they do any good or not, but they don't break down, and they help stop compacting, because they can't, because they're stones. And then, because I've got some, I'm going to put some charcoal in. I still don't really know if this does any good. I say that every time, but I still keep adding it in. It supposedly helps keep the media sweet. It stops it going acidic and helps stop any build-up of toxic chemicals from fertilisers and things, which you'd have a job to get a build-up the level I feed at. So that's my mix. It's dry. And I'm not going to bother crocking the bottom of the pots. I'm going to pot the plants quite deep. It's all the right words, not necessarily in the right order. Giving your age away if you know what that comes from. Right, so we'll pop some in. That's the larger one. So we'll do the smaller one first. Pop some in. These plants are still wet from their spray, which means I'm going to get it on my hands, but I'll give them a good wash in a minute. So I'm just going to sort of plonk that down. The latest growth, well, the oldest growth is at the back of the plant, let's put it that way. So the latest growth is nearer the front. I'm just making sure that we don't leave any gaps anywhere. Now these plants will need watering very frequently to start with, because this is new bark and it will dry fast. And it's wobbling all over the place, so I'm going to put a stake in. Where are my clips? See if we can get away with the clip and not have to tie it. So all I'm going to do is put the stake down the side of the pot, like that, and clip that back bulb to it, and that will hold the plant steady. And we will use a grabby clip there. So that's actually got it quite firm now, and eventually the media will sort of stabilise itself around the roots, but that's that one done. So all that needs now is a really good wash. And the other one, same again. So what I'm not doing is bringing the plant right up to the top of the pot with the media, because that would mean the media is quite deep. However, with this one I've got to get the roots in early, because these long roots are the viable ones. They're very, very flexible, so I've got no worries about twisting them round in the pot like that. Get down in there, you. Got one really long bit. I want that in the pot because that's highly liable to branch. So that's got the roots down where I want them, and it's got the plant where I want it as well, which is with the oldest part of the back. Yeah. So now all we've got to do is fill the gaps in. Well, I want to see these gaps filling in as I go, so I'm doing it a bit at a time, so that I can see that it's the tapping is definitely getting in the media in between all the gaps. That's the theory. And this is a relatively small mix. There's no giant pieces in here, it's all relatively small. And that's what I want for this plant. Is that gonna, see, that's a bit steadier, but still no good reason whatsoever not to put a stake against that old bit on the grounds I've got them. They're right under my nose, and they do tend to hold the plant steady just while the roots start to spread around and attach to all the little pieces. It joins everything all together then. So you know, that's not as good this time, so I'm going to take it off and have another go. No point in having a stake if it's not stable. So what we do if you get an unstable stake is take it out and try it again. Make sure it goes right down in. Make sure the stake's pretty stable before you attach the plant to it. And that one was just messing me about, so just use a grabby one again. There we go. That's got it. That'll do. And I'm just going to put some of the smaller pieces here, without stones in. It's a bit fiddly doing this sort of thing where you're physically choosing a part of your media for a specific purpose. And the specific purpose is I want some small stuff around the base of that new growth, or the latest growth, because that's where the roots are going to come out if we're going to get any new ones. So I don't want any like pieces of stone right up against the plant like that. It'd be better if we had media. Right, so there we go, 2 plants potted up. I'm still not confident I know which is which. So the stake went right through the bottom of the pot. I wonder why the pot wouldn't sit down. Pushed it a bit hard. I'm still not absolutely sure which is which. As a consequence, I could do labels, but I wouldn't know which pot to put them in. So at the moment, I won't bother. But I will get a bag and keep this as a mixed up mix, basically. I wouldn't waste it. You know, the bark's becoming more difficult to get hold of nowadays, so we don't want to go wasting stuff, do we? And I'll put a note in my notes. What I'll do is I'll put a bar of colour, bright colour, across the name of the plant, and I'll put the date in it so that it will remind me that this needs another fungicide treatment in. I suppose I better show you that. Somebody's going to ask what I use. Read it for yourself, but that's what I use at the moment. I don't say that that's the best there is, but it's got an ingredient in it that I'm pretty confident works with Fusarium, as long as it's systemic and it can get to it. Spraying it on the outside of the plant, if it's not systemic, is not going to do it. It needs to be systemic. I was just looking at the repeat. Spray at first sign of disease, attack, and repeat at 21-day intervals. For black spot and rust on roses, repeat at 28s. If the disease is already established, spray at intervals of 14 days. So yes, 14 days then for that one. So say they do vary, so you need to read it, find out. So that's it. That's a off the mount and into a pot session. That doesn't happen often. It's usually the other way around. But you know, these weren't doing well on the mount. Let's give them a go on the pot. Give them some treatment if that's what was stopping them being vigorous, and see where they go from there. They're both easily replaced if they don't make it. That's the way I look at it. Sweet sugar and Sheilog Tolkien can be found relatively easy. So, see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.